Hey everyone, welcome to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a fantastic show for you today. We are going to be talking about the latest stats on smart speakers. We've got an IFT integration for Sonos, a $6.7 billion chip deal to talk about, Qualcomm's latest Wear chip, NXP actually has a security chip for Google, and we've got a new IoT security bill that's on the governor's desk in California. Just so you know, we're not talking about Apple because we're recording like a few hours before it happens. We've also got a lot of little news, such as Samsung launching its IoT tracker on the LTE network that we've talked about in the past, updates on my June oven issue, updates on Kevin's Nest Yale lock issue. We're going to talk a little bit about what we know about the IKEA blinds, and we've got a message from this week's sponsor, SAS. Plus, our guest this week is Ann Boschy of Bain, who's going to talk about the $520 billion industry that IoT will be in 2021 and who gets it. And as always, we'll answer a voicemail from our listener. So let's get this show started with a message from one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is Aucklet. 64% of IoT customers report problems with their IoT products. Don't waste time and money by manually identifying errors or using a tool built for a web server. Aucklet tracks architecture, regional patterns, system usage, and your application to identify when, where, and what caused the error. Stop settling and start fixing problems before your customers find them. Get started today at aucklet.io. That's Aucklet, AUKLET.io. Oh, and speaking of problems, I forgot to tell you that we're going to be talking about the brilliant smart switch, which I did have a few problems with, and we'll talk about that also on this show. So, Kevin, let's get started with voice. We've got some new stats from Adobe. None of these really surprised me, but I will admit to having been a die-hard voice smart speaker user since the Echo came out at the end of 2014. So the big thing is 70% of people report using a voice assistant for music, 64% using it for weather, and then 53% use it to ask fun questions. I bet all of that is children. Children love talking to that thing.
Yeah, I don't ask fun questions. I mean, maybe before the show as we're just kind of goofing off or something, but not so much in everyday life.
Not so much? Well, I know that on my Echo Show, sometimes it'll show me questions to ask, like, ask Madam A. Madam A, by the way, is what we call the Amazon Echo ecosystem in Assistant, so we don't set off yours. So it's like, ask Madam A what the big news is today about Tokyo. And my daughter inevitably is like, oh, Madam A, what is the big news about Tokyo? And then it's usually not exciting.
Yeah, and you're right about this report from Adobe. They asked 1,000 U.S. smart speaker owners what they do with their devices. There wasn't any new activities where I'm like, oh, I should try that. But what was interesting is they kind of rank the usage patterns. And those stats you just quoted were for primary activities. The ones that I use are in the emerging use cases, which is weird because I've been using these for so long. And I guess, I don't know, I'm just weird. But I'm looking at things like only 31% use them for smart home commands.
I know.
Yeah. Or what was the other one? 36% for making calls. That is more of an emerging use case because that's a more relatively new feature. So I get that one. But people actually ask about their calendar and their schedule or sports scores just as much as they do smart home commands. And I'm like, wow, maybe it's just because we've been doing the smart home thing so much longer than most people.
Yeah, I think we're definitely a very, I don't want to say elite audience, but we are definitely a niche audience for that.
Yeah.
And I was actually curious. So food delivery, I get because Domino's has had a thing. Uber has had a thing, a skill for a while. But hotel and flight research, are you doing that?
No, not there.
Okay, that was my thought. I'm like, how is that even working? So now I'm tempted to be like, okay.
Well, maybe, just maybe, it is a really good feature that we're not using because, I mean, we book travel. And when you do it or I do it, I typically go through an app or through the web.
Yeah, I am almost all web.
Right.
Because I want to see all the options. And right now, my apps are all like the individual airline apps, and that's just crazy.
Yeah.
So other things to know is 32% of consumers reported owning a smart speaker in August 2018. So that's like a third of consumers here in the US. This is compared to 28% in January of this year. So that's a 14% increase in 8 months. And I don't know. I mean, like that makes total sense to me. People are constantly sending in questions about the show. They're like, hey, which one should I get? Or I just bought one. What should I do now? And basically people are more comfortable with voice. I'm really curious because it talks about like how people who have these start becoming more comfortable with voice. You mentioned that your family doesn't like talking to a smart speaker. Is that changing at all?
You know, if you were to just ask me and I didn't think about it, I'd say, nah, it's not changing at all. They barely use it. But I have to admit, as I think back over, I'll say the past year, year and a half, they probably do. And I think of cases like our downstairs lights come on before dusk every night, automatic, just happens. It's great. But if it's cloudy out, it's a little darker before that. So my wife is sitting in the living room and it's dark and she will say, Madam A, turn on the downstairs. Now, maybe that's because there's really not much of an alternative for her because, you know, she knows if she messes or touches switches in the house, that's going to mess things up. So maybe it's by a sheer lack of choices, but yeah, she's doing it and she doesn't seem as self-conscious about it as she used to.
You've bullied your wife into
Well,
voice.
Pretty much.
Oh, Kevin.
I know.
It's funny to imagine.
It's forced adoption.
There you go. Okay. So not really speaking of voice, actually, but this is the other side of voice, which is something else, a device talking to you, maybe, instead of you talking to a device. If this, then that, or IFT, the platform that, you know, we talk about it all the time. We use it to like connect web services to devices or web services to other web services using simple, if this happens, then do that commands. They have an integration now with Sonos. Yay!
Yippee!
So my goal was to create, right now I'm testing the Nest doorbell and it is a little wonky in my house. So sometimes the doorbell chime rings and sometimes it doesn't. I don't think this is a Nest issue. I think my doorbell might just be, I think it's tired. Is that a legitimate excuse? I don't know. But I was like, oh, when people press the doorbell, let's have the Sonos make a noise. Unfortunately, the Nest is not supported in IFT, that particular aspect of it. None of the Nest cameras seem to have support outside of the Nest ecosystem. Google hasn't opened up those APIs yet. But if I had a Skybell or a Ring, I totally could do that. And I've just been playing with like weird motion sensors or things happening at weird times. You do need to be careful. It becomes really irritating really quickly. Like, for example, when your phone gets into your Wi-Fi zone, having your theme song play, it sounds like a lot of fun, but it kind of sucks when you come into your Wi-Fi zone and it's like 2 a.m. and everybody's Sonos comes on playing, you know, I don't know, the boys are back in town. So.
Yeah, I could see that being annoying. So coming home from, say, travel or something. Yeah. Or even like if you hooked it up with a supported webcam that when the camera saw you walk in the house, it would play your songs or whatever. If somebody's taking a nap or something like that, that's probably not cool.
You can set time limits. So unless it is between, 10 at night and 6 in the morning, I have to be careful because my daughter has a Sonos in her room and she goes to bed earlier than everyone else. So just little things to think about, but you can have a lot of fun with this. I think an interesting use case would actually be a button. So if there are lots of Logitech pop buttons. I've tested the Pebblebee buttons. A lot of those are supported on IFT, and you could actually create a button that plays your theme song or that plays your favorite song or your favorite playlist. So, you might carry that on your keychain and just be like, oh, I feel my groove coming on. Click. So.
Yeah, aside from choosing like a predefined Sonos favorite song, album, artist, etc. playlist, you get quite a bit of functionality here. The IFT integration, aside from basic playback controls with pause, resume, next, previous, you can even control the volume. So if you have a doorbell that's supported and the doorbell rings, maybe it could mute the Sonos so you can go answer the door in peace and quiet.
That is actually one of my favorite things that the Unomi software did. I just thought of this. I'm glad you mentioned that. Whenever my phone would ring, it would actually mute my Sonoses that were playing anywhere in the house, which is kind of sucky if like my daughter was listening to music in her room and my phone rang. But in certain use cases, this is actually really nice. And, you could actually set that up on your iOS or Android device easily with IFT. So,
and I wonder, I haven't looked at the new IFT integration, but I wonder if you can set this to specific Sonos devices so that if you have multiple ones, maybe your daughter's doesn't mute, but the one in your living room does.
You can do that. So that gives you a lot of options. Moving right along. Okay, next, we have a ginormous semiconductor deal. And you guys know how much I love my semiconductors. So this is Renesas. It is agreed to buy Integrated Device Technology, Inc. for $6.7 billion. This helps Renesas get into semiconductors for automobiles. And you guys may not be aware of this, but today's cars have so much silicon on them. It is a huge deal. When Qualcomm bought CSR, and then later when it tried to buy NXP, automobiles were actually the driving factors behind those acquisitions. So Renesas is second only to NXP in auto-related chips, and it's got about 30% of the market for microcontrollers used in cars. So it does need the analog chips that Integrated Device Technology uses. And just so you guys, analog chips are those that convert analog signals like sound waves. I'm trying to think of other analog things. Any sort of physical happening into digital. And that's really important in cars for like pressure sensors, measuring heat in the engines, all that fun stuff. So this isn't like a super secret kind of deal. It's part of a larger trend in consolidation among semiconductor manufacturers. Part of this is because as you get into IoT, the average selling prices of the chips are much lower. You are selling a whole lot more, but they're cheaper. So you really need a lot more economies of scale associated with it. So,
yeah, two quick notes to this story. I mean, it's good news for sure for the industry. This is the second big acquisition Renesas has made this year, and those two acquisitions, including the 6.7, now total $10 billion. That's a big chunk of change. They bought Intersil, which again, yes, analog chips, for example. But the other thing to note, and I didn't know this, IDT, which, okay, yes, they have chips that they can supply for the automakers. They only generate 11% of their revenue from automotive and industrial businesses. So I just wonder if this is a big price to pay for what they're getting. We'll have to see.
I don't know. S&P Global did put Renesas on a negative credit watch, saying, holy cow, you are buying a lot of crazy stuff. S&P should not monitor my gadget purchases. Good Lord.
No.
Okay, let's see. Speaking of chips, Qualcomm introduced a new one for wearable devices. And Kevin saw this and was like,
So it's good that they are introducing this, but I am a little meh on it, and I'll tell you why. So for those who don't know, just about every single Google Android wearable, now it's called Wear OS, I apologize, Wear OS watch runs on a Qualcomm Snapdragon chip. It's the old 2100. It came out 2 years ago, and even then it was kind of getting a little long in the tooth. Now, it's good that Qualcomm's Snapdragon Wear 3100 is now out, and there are no devices out with it yet, although Mont Blanc has announced that they will have one very soon, and I'm sure we're going to see a ton of them at CES. But two thoughts here. One is that it's really not the chip hardware that's been holding Google's smartwatches back from sales. It's really been a kind of mediocre user experience with the interface, which has changed majorly 2 or 3 times now. So that's part one of this. Part two is the 3100 chip. It is good in that it offloads most of the low power stuff to a low power processor that's also on this chip. It's like a big little architecture. There's 2 chips, one that's heavy duty processing and one that's light processing. But it's not a major change in that chip technology from the 2100. It's really meant to boost battery life on these smartwatches. So don't expect like major performance gains, although that would probably be hard to measure in general on a smartwatch because the apps are so small. But it just seemed like a very incremental thing for them to do. And they could have done it a while ago, to be honest.
Okay, so that's why Kevin's like, meh. Meanwhile, I am like, hoo, it's so exciting. And the reason why is because Qualcomm, with this chip, they've introduced a low-power coprocessor that uses what's called near-threshold design. Okay, are you guys ready to get nerdy? Because
I'm ready.
This is a big deal. So near-threshold design has been very early stage, cutting edge. The idea is that you are basically giving the chip enough voltage. You're giving it plenty of voltage so you know it works, right? It's going to flip the switch, right? It's going to happen. It's going to happen. There's plenty of power. Near threshold says, we're just going to give you just enough. And that's really hard to do. It requires a lot of tight transistor design. Things like leakage become really important there. So there's no margin for error, and it's pretty cool. And the fact that Qualcomm's doing it because they do a lot of their manufacturing process with like TSMC, that means this is going to be accessible to a lot of companies. And this significantly lowers the power. I'm going to tell you there's another chip company that I've been following for years called Ambic Micro. And they actually do sub-threshold design, which is like this, only even more so. And those guys are in some Huawei wearables, and they're in the Spire wearable that you basically tape into your underwear, and it tracks your activity and all kinds of other stuff. And it lasts for like a year and a half. So this is a really big deal on what Kevin says is a mad chip, in that it's going to bring lower power to a lot of IoT devices. So that's my woo!
All right. I'm a little less meh now. Okay.
Yeah, I know. I'm my buddy Lee Ratliff, who's an analyst, he explains it really well. He says power consumption is proportional to the square of the voltage. So even a small decrease in voltage can have a really big impact on battery life. So, woo! Okay. If you slept through all of that, wake up, because NXP has announced a security chip for Google's IoT cloud service.
With an exciting name. This will wake people up.
Oh, dear.
Can I say it?
Yeah, go for it.
Let me see if I pronounce this correctly. This is tricky. A71CH.
I think you nailed it.
Thank you.
So
I practiced.
We don't necessarily care about the name of the chip so much as we care about what this is this is linking security keys to Google's cloud. This is very similar to the design that Microsoft is offering with its Project Sopris, in that you're linking a particular cloud in a cloud OS to security hardware on a chip. And that's actually, a lot of people look at that as the future of how we're going to develop more secure IoT devices. And the fact now that NXP is doing this for Google, hey, that's worth something. So that's why we think this is cool.
No, this is a big deal. Name kidding aside, this is a big deal. NXP says the device credentials are pre-injected into the chip, and public keys are sent to the end user through whatever interface is required, etc.
Okay. Speaking of security, the first IoT security bill has been approved in California and is waiting on the governor's desk to be signed into law. This is SB 327.
Yeah, so basically the big provision in this bill is that a manufacturer of a connected device shall equip the device with a reasonable security feature or features. That's a little vague, so that's concerning to me, because what is reasonable security? It does talk about authentication procedures, such as if a connected device is equipped with a means for authentication outside a local network, there are 2 criteria that the authentication system must meet. So unique passwords, for example, or it must prompt a user to set up their own password. So this is a good step forward.
That's true. And things like reusing keys looks like it may not be acceptable under this law.
Nope.
Which has been a favorite way that hackers get into, like Bluetooth or even Zigbee options. So, woo!
The password is 1111.
However, this is not an end-all be-all, because it doesn't deal with so many aspects of IoT security. But it is a start. We'll see how it is. And by the way, we should update you on the Internet of Things Cybersecurity Improvement Act that was in the U.S. Senate. I didn't think this bill was all that or a piece of cake. It basically talked about what devices the government should buy, and the security standards were pretty minimal. But that isn't going anywhere right now, so this is what we have. And California's laws do actually tend to influence a lot of developments around the country because it is such a huge and influential state. So keep an eye on that. Okay, moving on. More security. We've got more botnets. Actually, well, no, one of them's the same botnet, and the other one, we're going to call it GAFKit, you think?
I think it's GAFKit, and obviously the other one is Mirai, and I'll tell you, I wonder if we'll ever stop talking about Mirai.
Maybe in like a decade.
Yeah.
Which is like a millennia in internet time.
Mm-hmm.
But tell us about what's happening now.
So the Palo Alto Networks Unit 42 has a new report out, and Mirai and GAFGID are basically moving beyond the typical targets, which in the past we've talked about, such as connected cameras and security systems and routers. Now it's moving into the enterprise because the open source framework Apache Struts, which is used for Java Platform Enterprise Edition. There's your enterprise hook, and was also what was attacked in the Equifax breach last year. It's still unpatched, so Mirai is now targeting those systems. So now it's getting into potentially enterprise Java apps. That is not good. So that's an expansion of targets there. And then GAFGIT, which is also known as Baz Lite, which is probably easier to say, is attacking unsupported versions of SonicWall's global management system. So this is bad because it's going, again,
SonicWall
beyond
is the firewall, right?
Yeah, that's a firewall product for networks and enterprises and such. So that is also bad.
Extra bad. Okay, well, they knew what to attack. Yay. All right, so any good news on that front, Kevin?
Not until these things get patched.
Okay.
And that just speaks to a bigger issue here. Botnets and other IoT device hacks and attacks, they're not limited to a specific type of device or a specific client or a consumer or enterprise. They're widespread and they will just keep looking for things to infect. And it's really scary when you think about how many connected devices are out there. We talk about this all the time. Billions and billions. And, how do you patch everything is the question.
Yes, we're not going to solve that today on this show. Maybe next week.
Oh, bummer.
But let's talk about some quick updates. News bits. All right. Oh, Kevin, I'm going to give this to you because you're the guy who found it.
Nobody seems to remember that, but you're right. In fact, we talked about it on the podcast, probably early August, maybe late July. I noticed an FCC filing for Samsung's SmartThings tracker, and it was going to work with both Verizon and AT&T's LTE M1 networks. And sure enough, it just got announced this week. So think of this like a Bluetooth tracker, only it doesn't use Bluetooth. But if you have a Tile or some other similar tracking device, this is just like that, except it has a GPS and it connects to in the first case, AT&T's network. It will cost you $99. It's real-time tracking. Again, because of GPS, you can set geofencing with it. It works with SmartThings. And there's even a panic button, which is nice. So you can use it as a personal tracker if you don't want to attach it to your luggage. The $99 includes AT&T service for the first year. After the first year, you're going to be paying $5 a month or $50 a year. Available later this week, actually, at select AT&T stores and Samsung.com. I presume a Verizon model will follow very soon because the FCC tested also for Verizon's networks.
So those prices are kind of insane for tracking my luggage. But
I agree.
Putting it in your kid's backpack, if I were kidnapping children, which I am not doing, but if I were, the first thing I would do is throw away the backpack. But, sticking it on your kid might work. My dog used to be able to escape my fence and run all over the place. I would put it on my dog. I think that's a lovely use case for it. Would it, again, because it's cellular and so expensive, you really have to have a high cost or high value item to attach this to.
Exactly. I'm probably not going to put this on my keys to my car, even though that is a high value thing because I have a spare key and so on and so forth. But a one-of-a-kind item that is hard to replace or has things that you need for, say, a trip in your luggage, yeah, I would do that. It's just that $5 a month really gets me. But the first year is included.
You do pay that for your LTE on your Apple Watch, right?
I paid $10 for that. What I get for that, for me personally, is my family knows where I am all the time because it is tracking the GPS and so on in there and is uploading that information to them if they need it. I also get all my calls and my texts. My notifications, I don't care about that when I'm out and about running or something, but it's nice to have the ability to even make a call from my wrist without my phone if I get hurt while I'm running.
Okay, yeah. So you're buying peace of mind.
I'm buying peace of mind because
awesome
darn it,
tracking.
I'm worth it.
You are worth it. Maybe
Yeah,
you should
15 a
expense
month.
that.
I wouldn't do it for 15. I'm not worth 15 a month.
Oh, okay. I was like, I would chip in your extra 5 though. You're worth it to me, Kevin.
Well, thank you.
All right. Oh, here's an update. I complained 2 weeks ago, I think, about my June oven and how I felt like it had changed. It wouldn't recognize my toast anymore. And this really upset me. It turns out that June checked the logs because they can do that on a connected device. And they're like, Stacey, you have a giant grease blob on your camera. Just clean that
Bing.
up. Which is exactly what Kevin told me it was. And it's time to say that Kevin was indeed right in this situation.
I checked your logs too, just so you know.
Ooh, creepy.
No, I'm kidding.
You know exactly how many waffles I toast. It is a little disturbing to know that if June wants to, they could be like, wow, Stacey, you cook a lot of Eggo waffles.
But you know what? They always, whenever you request support help, they ask permission to view your logs. Are they doing that behind the scenes? I doubt it. Could they? Yeah. But any company could look at the data they're getting from the device.
And it's okay that they know I'm making a baked potato or that I ate an inordinate number of waffles.
Right.
So I'm not cooking anything weird like a human head. So.
Ew.
Also in complaints, we talked about the Nest by Yale lock, and we have an update on that.
Yeah, that was our complaint show a week or two ago. That's right. The Google Home integration with the Nest by Yale lock. I know we talked about it because it was announced right before the podcast a week or two ago. I couldn't get it to work no matter what I did. And Stacy had sent me a great set of troubleshooting steps from when she had worked with Nest for troubleshooting something similar in the past. And I was just about to do that when all of a sudden I went into my Nest app and it said there's a new application permission that we'd like access to. I'm like, really? What is that? And sure enough, it was for the ability to see the state and information from the Nest by Yale lock. So the integration just hadn't rolled out to me yet, so I did not have to do anything. So all my complaining was kind of for nothing because I was impatient. But it does work now, and I can speak to my home devices right now. I'm not going to because I don't want to set people's off, and ask it if the front door is locked. I can tell it to lock the door, and I think that's it. You might be able to assign specific codes because it is a touchpad lock and to different people, and then it could tell you who's home. I think that's a possibility, but I will have to check on that.
Well, we will await your very words. Okay.
Yeah, you could create a routine with it now, though, too.
Oh, yeah, that's true. So, like, set up movie time, lower the thermostat.
Turn on my Sonos.
Nest doesn't
No,
work
it doesn't work with it. Oh, Nest.
Father. All right,
Boo.
well, we'll figure that out. Okay, quick update for everybody who follows the connected blinds story. It turns out that IKEA has submitted documentation to the FCC for connected blinds. Okay, you guys, this is probably, I know I call everything the most common show question, but we do actually get this question about, hey, I want smart blinds. And so this being IKEA, I expect it to work with the Trodfee Hub. I also expect it to be cheaper than the current options, which are kind of expensive. There's My Smart Blinds, which is one of the cheaper ones that works with wooden slat blinds, the big ones. And that is $99 per window. And there's a limit to how big that blind thing it will move. There are the Lutron Serena shades. Hunter Douglas has some. Bali has some. And Somfy has.
They're all expensive,
yeah.
Which is why I don't have them.
Well, both the motorized shades are expensive. Adding connectivity to motorized shades is not like the big cost there. It's the motorized part of the shade because these motors have to move, in some cases, a lot of cloth, and they have to be quiet. And in some of the fancier iterations, so I have motorized shades in my house for like ginormous windows, and those were $10,000, which is bonkers. So, but they cover a 10 by 14 window. So there's a lot of fabric to move. They actually plug into dedicated low voltage, and they're really quiet. But most people aren't going to pay that.
Agreed. Well, I'm not, so that's why I don't have them. And IKEA products do tend to be less expensive. I mean, look at the Trodfee line. It's cheaper than most other smart home device lines. So I'm hoping, really hope.
And I don't think we'll have to wait too long because IKEA usually announces their new products in October. So stay tuned.
Real quick, a question about the Trodfee Hub. The radios that supports. I'm assuming it's Zigbee based. I'm looking at the FCC report, and based on the frequencies that they tested, I assume this is Zigbee.
It is Zigbee, but it's custom Zigbee. So you can't.
No, that's not Zigbee.
Okay, custom Zigbee. I can't remember if it's HA or something else. But yes, you have to have that particular hub. You can't link it. I could not link my Trodfee lights to other hubs.
So even if you have a Zigbee hub, if it's not a Trodfee hub, you won't be able to use these, presumably.
Right.
Boo.
Boo. Okay. So yeah, that's more hub news. So, okay, let's talk quickly about the new brilliant light switch and smart home control device that's out. I've actually been testing it. It came out not at a good time for us because it was after last week's podcast went live, so we couldn't talk about it. But I have been testing it. It is a light switch, a one switch panel, so that replaces one switch, is $300, and it goes all the way up to 4 switch panels for $449. So what these are, they replace your existing light switch. You do have to be comfortable turning off your power and, messing around with some wires, but it's not hard. I'm not going to recommend these just yet. We're going to have the CEO on the show, and we'll talk more about what's happening. I think in a few months, this is going to be a very different product, and I think then I would recommend it. But for right now, it has a lot going on, and the UI it's not great yet. So I think it'd be confusing for most normal people. If you are a dedicated smart home user, go ahead. You're used to playing around with stuff and things improving over time. This is fine. What it does is it acts as a light switch, It also acts as an intercom. It acts as a Madam A device, and it ties into a variety of smart home products like the Ring doorbell, the Sonos, Wemo, Hue lights, Nest, coming soon, and also SmartThings. So that's a lot of things that you can do with it. You can set scenes. And the idea is you walk in and you can use this to control your home via voice or via a touchpad. It's got a touchpad screen on it. What I found is the touchpad's too small to control all the devices really easily. What I think is really interesting, though, is you could install this in a couple places in your home and actually control all the lights in your home, which when they figure out the user interface and make it a little bit more easy, I think this could be really powerful for a lot of people.
It could be. And you had shown me, we did a video hangout and you showed me a little bit of the usage, and it reminds me of the old Wink Relay in some regards, which had a touch screen and was able to literally show your Wink shortcuts and your devices on there. But I still think there might be a little bit of work left on the software side for the Brilliant.
Agree. Okay, so now let's talk about the integrations. I started out just playing with it plain, and I will say one of the nicer features, because I'm goofy this way, was being able to upload my own photos to run on this panel. So it's like this neat little digital photo frame. You can only do 25, and it's kind of time consuming. You have to individually upload each photo. But it is really nice to like walk by this light switch and see pictures of my family. Aw. Some things that were hard is once I brought in my Hue lights, there was a little glitchiness in bringing in my Hue lights. One of them didn't show up. And then to control all of them as one unit was a bit time consuming, like to actually create like a schedule for my living room, because there's no way to group light bulbs yet. For example, with the Hue setting, there's no way to group light bulbs into a single room. And that's kind of frustrating because no one really wants to control, unless it's in a lamp, all their Hue bulbs differently.
Not in the same room, yeah.
So that's one thing. They do say that that's coming in 2 to 3 weeks. So is a non-hackish Nest integration. They're just waiting for Google approval. And you can create scenes, and those are interesting. And the Sonos integration is actually doing really well for them. It only links to favorites or radio station, but apparently that's how a lot of people use their Sonos. And if you need to control for like deep dives into specific songs, then you have to go into the Sonos app. So do I love it? It's all right. Do I think it's going to get better? Yes. Oh, and SmartThings. The SmartThings integration is nice. You can't control all of the devices that you can put into your SmartThings system. And then with the Amazon Echo integration, it actually sometimes, it won't play music for you, but it does do things like when you ask it for the weather, it'll show you the weather on the screen. So it's kind of like an Echo Show, but it doesn't do all the things an Echo Show does.
Yeah, very much reminds me of that Wink Relay because you could do a lot of things, similar things and displays. Interestingly, the photos is nice. Having to manually upload them somewhere is kind of, 2004-ish to me, but I understand why. You need some kind of integration. I only mention this because just earlier this week, Google opened up its Google Photos API, and that means apps can then have integrations to people's Google Photos. The other reason I mention it is because for the next podcast, you're going to have something that will automatically pull in your Google Photos for you. You won't have to upload them. It'll just be there. And you know what I'm talking about.
I do. Kevin sent me a Lenovo display. Woo woo. Okay.
Yay.
That's right. I sang. That's how exciting it is. So that's what we'll talk about for now on the Brilliant.
How much is it?
It's $299 for the one gang. So the one switch, which compares to like the $99 price for the Wink Relay, I think it was.
Yeah, it was $99 and even came down in price after.
You don't still have that installed, do you?
Not installed. I still have it.
Okay. And a 2-switch panel, which is probably the most common, is $349. And they will bundle stuff together for you. Oh, and it also works with the Ecobee. I forgot that. So.
And it looks, I've only seen it on the Hangouts chat, but it looks like it's worth that money.
Oh, yeah, it's really pretty.
Yeah.
It's a very nice device, and the microphone on it is crazy sensitive for talking to Madam A. So, yeah, I actually turned that function off because it was fighting with my other Madam A, and that Madam A does more things. So I was like, ugh, I don't want you. So that's just me. Okay, so let's go to our listener hotline. The IoT Podcast listener hotline is brought to you by Schlage. Do not miss your chance to win a Schlage Sense Smart Deadbolt and Wi-Fi adapter. You can enter to win by calling us and leaving us a question. That number is 512-888-8255. 623-7424. Note that we will only ship the lock to Canada and the US, unfortunately. So remember, smarter homes start with Schlage. And this week we have a question from an unknown individual, but it's still a really good question. So let's hear it.
Hey, Stacy and Kevin. Longtime listener, and you guys had an episode a while ago where Kevin talked about using his Hue bulbs, the color ones, to show a different shade of color, like red or blue, I think, based on whether or not Kevin's stocks were trading well. And I want to employ a similar use, but with temperature. So when I wake up, I'd like for one of my color bulbs to display a blue or red in greater intensity or dimness based on the current temperature. I would love to know if this is possible. I have Philips Hue bulbs. I use Google Home and am willing to do pretty much anything. All right. Thanks so much.
Okay. This is a great question. And Kevin and I have actually both done this or variations of this in our lives. I've actually done literally what you are asking. So I'm going to give you the easy answer, and Kevin is going to give you a hard answer. The easy answer.
But mine's more fun.
Yours is more fun, and it has the potential to be way more detailed. So my answer is I set up my Hue bulbs with IFT, and then I just set up a basic rule that if the weather is above, usually I do it in the winter. So I do if the weather is above 40, turn red, and if the weather is below 32, turn blue. I did this in a light in my closet for a while because then I was like, oh, now I know how to dress in the morning. Is it perfect? No, because you have to set your temperature parameters. You're relying on a weather service that may not be directly outside your house. You could, if you had like a NetAtmo device, you could link directly to like a NetAtmo weather station, which is right outside your door. Sometimes you have temperature sensors in doorbells, but I don't think you can access them yet. So that's ways to get more granular at your house weather. But you also then, after that, you have to like reset the light or create another recipe to make it go back to normal. But that is an easy way to do it. It doesn't cost you a thing. It works with your existing stuff and you can play around with it until you get something you like. And then there's Kevin's option.
The hardest way to do something simple. That's my motto. So what I did, just to refresh everybody, I literally created a Python program that reads information from an API of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency trading services. So it's constantly every minute getting up-to-date numbers on the actual currency prices. And then I used another API based on information and said, hey, turn on my LifeX bulb to green if the price is up, and even increase the brightness if it's up over a certain percentage. So I had a super fine granular amount of control where I can literally get a more precise ambient notification. Obviously, this is a programming exercise and you'd need to have something to run that program on. I used a Raspberry Pi, for example. So, you'd have to add something to your smart home. You would have to do some programming. I've shared most of the code on our site, so it's a good stub to get started. But you also need to make sure that APIs for your products are available. And in the case of Philips Hue, there are APIs to control lights. So literally you could get temperature information using a program and set parameters that those would be your trigger events if you were, to compare it to if. And then what you want to happen would be an API that sends data to your Philips Hue lights. So it's going to require some effort on your part, but it's, as Stacy said, it's something that could do a lot more and could be reused in many other cases very easily. Just changing a few lines of code could import information from another source. Maybe it's stock markets. Maybe it's if your mailbox has been open and you have a sensor on it, for example, you can get a light to blink when the mail is here. There's lots of different applications.
Sorry.
Okay. But I'm just coming up with random examples. But you're right. Yeah, there's lots of ways to do this. IFT would be what I would recommend for most people, yes. So I would start there. If you're into programming, you want to learn about APIs, it's a fun experience, I think. So two ways to go.
And we'll link to Kevin's story about that so you can see exactly what he did, just in case you're that kind of person.
Yes. I hate to be that guy, but I don't want to be the only that guy. So please join me.
There you go. And we love Kevin because he's that guy. All right. Now it's time for a word from our sponsor, but stay tuned because our guest this week is Ann Bashi of Bain. She's going to talk about why IoT providers need to focus on just a few use cases, what vendors need to do to improve their services for companies buying IoT solutions, and who's going to get what chunks of the $520 billion pie for the Internet of Things. You're going to like it. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, we are taking a break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is SAS, and I have Jason Mann, who is VP of IoT with SAS. Last week, we talked about SAS creating a new division for IoT. This week, we're going to talk about the edge. So let's kick it off. What is the value of the edge in the Internet of Things?
I think the value can change based on use case. The first element is just the reduction in cost of transport and storage of data. Everyone sees the projections of the number of sensors that are going to be deployed in the edge and the amount of data that's being generated. And the fact is, even with commodity transport, commodity storage, if you move everything through the network and into storage, it's going to be quite expensive. And the fact is, most of the data is not relevant. So the first capability is reduce that footprint of data you're moving through your network. And then it really gets into the use cases around reduced latency and decisioning, failure identification, yield improvement. And then within our customer-centric industries like retail or healthcare, it really provides the basis for a unique engagement model with your customer, unique messaging based on what you know about your customer and where they may be within their ecosystem. It really does vary by your use case.
So, everybody's talking about the edge these days. What are the SAS differentiators in this landscape?
So I talked a little bit about this in our last topic, but it really has been about the investment in being able to execute. A lot of people talk at 10,000 feet around the ability to push decisioning to the edge, but it's quite complex. The data standards, the device configurations, and SAS has invested extensively in that with the verification validation effort to make sure that when we say we can push a robust set of analytics and capabilities to the edge, that we can actually do that.
And we talked briefly about them, but what other industry verticals are working at the edge?
We're starting to see adoption across multiple industries. There are those industries that have a long history with sensor data, so we're seeing early adoption in those spaces. Things like energy, both generation and distribution. Transportation is an area for wide adoption, both in fleet management and autonomous cars. So it's really not one industry that I could point to say they are a leader in this space, but there's wide adoption.
Great. So if we want to learn more about what SAS is doing at the edge, where can we go?
We have a great landing page set up for additional information, whether it's industry specific or more horizontal capabilities that can be found at sas.com/IoT.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Ann Bashi, who is a partner and leader in the IoT practice with Bain & Company. Hi Ann, how are you today?
I'm great, Stacey. Thanks so much for having me on.
Man, I'm super excited. You guys have done some great reports. I'm like, wow, lots of money in IoT. You talk about all kinds of really challenging issues. So let's just get this started with a level set. Where are we in industrial and enterprise IoT today?
We have done recent research over the course of the last 2 years in time series to understand what the big changes are that we've seen in IoT. And a few things I'd say. The first one is it still is a really attractive opportunity, which I think most of your listeners would agree with. The market revenue for solution providers we find for solutions for Internet of Things is going to grow to over $500 billion by 2021, which is more than doubling what the market is today. So that is a tremendous opportunity. Also, what we found was that customers are really planning a lot more proof of concepts and executing a lot more proof of concepts, which is fantastic. It's really accelerating. The other thing that we found, though, is that many have tempered their expectations. So it's really interesting that they've been doing more proof of concepts, but really the expectation of the pace of rolling out and the pace of kind of extensive implementation of those proofs of concepts has actually fallen a bit. There's still a lot of energy, but I think it's just tempered. And so I think some of this is really adjusting for the hype that there was probably in 2016 versus today. But some of it is really the continued barriers to adoption that people are finding as they're starting and engaging on proof of concept. And we can talk a little bit more about those.
Okay, and we will. But first, I want to dig into this I think it was $520 billion was the number that you guys
Yeah.
had. So who gets that? Because there are a lot of different players happening right now in the industrial IoT and enterprise IoT. There's the big kind of traditional IT guys. There's a bunch of startups. And then there's the traditional old school Honeywell, Emerson, Johnson, Siemens, all of these guys. So how does that money kind of divvy up?
Yeah, I guess I would say there's a lot of money for many different pockets. The first one is, I think there is actually very interesting opportunities for the traditional technology players, especially when it comes to a couple of things. So connectivity, obviously, for the Ciscos and the Ericssons of the world, as well as the telecom providers. Obviously, there's a big opportunity in connecting more devices. There's also opportunity for the cloud providers, like a Microsoft or an AWS, are really attacking the space, as well as the private cloud providers, so the companies like IBM or HP, for example. And then I think the other interesting thing is obviously application providers. And so I think you mentioned, startups. So there's a lot of folks that are delivering point use case applications. There's definitely money in that. And then there's also custom application development that's happening by some of the large technology providers and then also systems integrators. And then, of course, we can't leave the folks that you were talking about, like a Honeywell or a Schneider or a GE that are providing the industrial equipment, because they also have the opportunity to use their customer relationships and their operational technologies to extend that to use IoT data. So really, there's a lot of money to go around. Our view at Bain is that there's not just one winner that's going to emerge from this. This is a really broad market space. I would say there's many different verticals here, and there's opportunity for many winners across those verticals.
Awesome. Yes, I would be terrified if you said one company would get it all, or even two, really.
It's funny, Stacey. I feel like we get that question a lot. Who's going to be the winner in IoT?
Everyone does love a winner, just a singular winner. So, okay, let's go into this concept of pilot purgatory, because it's fun to say. And you talked about maybe reality setting in a little bit more in this field. So what exactly is going on as these projects kind of get halted at the pilot stage or kind of stay there indefinitely?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a lot of interest. Obviously, we've done some recent primary research with customers, and our findings at Bain were really around that, before in 2016, about 40% of the executives that we interviewed were actually implementing or more likely executing proof of concepts. And over the course of the last 2 years, about 20% more of those executives responded that they actually are in proof of concepts. There's a real acceleration in the number of POCs that are happening. And when we talk with vendors, they talk about how extensive the asks are of proof of concepts by their sales forces, and then also the breadth of those. So that's kind of the good news.
When you say how extensive the asks are, do you mean like the number of companies asking, or do you mean like they want a whole heck of a lot?
Yes, exactly. So just the number of POCs that they've got going on.
Okay, so these are happening, and what's happening inside these companies as they're doing them, and they're like, oh, what are they learning?
Well, they're learning a few things. So the first one is that there's still a lot of barriers to adoption that haven't really been broken down. But we found that the top 3 issues that customers are facing in terms of barriers to scaling proof of concept and IoT solutions are really the same as they were 2 years ago. And so the first one is around security. It's the most acute challenge that customers are facing. There's just a lot of concern scaling out. So they might be okay doing a proof of concept that is, ring-fenced, but then thinking about scaling out without more robust security capabilities on the device or the access or concern on protecting the data is something that's keeping them from rolling out solutions more broadly, probably at least more extensively. I think that people are implementing, but there's probably an opportunity for vendors, if they can kind of crack this security challenge and concern, to increase the number of devices that they end up selling and the extensiveness of the solution, and actually even probably the ASP that they're able to charge.
And for those of you guys who don't speak jargon, ASP is average selling price. Okay, second.
Sorry, yes. The second one is around return on investment. And so I think, Stacey, you might have heard this from folks that are implementing new kinds of use cases that use IoT data. But there's really problems on both sides, both on the return and on the investment side. On the return side, there's kind of lack of clarity, I guess, on what they should expect in terms of upside. And I think vendors haven't done enough to really characterize what the value is of the solution. Customers aren't buying IoT. Customers are buying, a better decision, the ability to kind of reduce their maintenance cost or increasing the velocity of their supply chain. And so vendors need to kind of translate the data into how it allows customers to make better decisions and show that in the proof of concept. So that's on the return side. So just kind of lack of clarity of what kind of return they should expect. And then the second one, and probably more acute, is that the investment right now is too high, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first one is really around just how much customization is happening today. Each of these implementations often is very bespoke, very custom. The applications that are being developed to deliver around the use case often have less repeatability than in a more mature market. And so vendors really need to drive more repeatability across the use cases that they're implementing so they can understand the more common components and really get them better packaged out of the box. So I think that would help on the investment side.
Is that latter bit possible? Because I feel like a lot of the customers are the ones demanding this customization, in part because maybe their workforce isn't as familiar with IT, so they're building these highly complex dashboards for people. Or it could even be, just their equipment is so particular to them in that particular configuration.
I think that there's some truth in it. So I feel like we're back in the days of, the transition between a Siebel and a Salesforce. Everybody said there's no way that you can, customize. Our Salesforces are always different. But really, there's actually value in standardization. And so, which has a trade-off, right? You can have a lower investment and more standardization. And so I think there's just actually the challenge is that there's not really an offer yet today, right? For many use cases that's more standardized. And so people are having to create it from scratch. I think there is some truth in what you say, which is I think in comparison to an ERP, let's say, or a resource planning tool like an SAP or a Oracle, there's going to be more customization here. It's kind of like vertical applications. Vertical applications or industry-based applications are a lot more diverse and have a lot more vendors that supply them than some of the more horizontal software, like a customer relationship management tool. And so I think that there is opportunity to standardize more, Stacey, than there has been today. I just think the vendors haven't had enough reps, really, at each of the use cases in a particular vertical with a particular type of equipment, you know what I mean, to actually identify those little piece parts that actually can be more standard.
Okay. I feel like the vendors, you have some strong feelings about what they are and are not doing here. What would you be telling them right now?
Yeah, no, it's kind of funny because they're all experiencing the same thing. Just like you said, pilot purgatory on the customer side. I feel like, when we talk with vendors, all different pieces of IoT solutions, they're kind of in the same boat, which is that they've got so many proofs of concepts that are going on and they're trying to figure out which ones to actually engage on. They're trying to figure out what actually can be repeatable because from their economics, it doesn't work either to have something that's custom each time. And so they would like to also reduce the amount of customization that they're having to do. What's challenging about this is IoT is so broad, right? It's like an opportunity across all industries. And so in a nascent technology market like this, the horizontal technology vendors, like we talked about all those different vendors that are capturing that $520 billion potentially in the future, right? But there's so many of them. They actually need to refocus. Like many of them are saying, I've got 10 different verticals that I'm, attacking. That's just too many. You can't actually figure out how to penetrate a particular use case if you're focused on 80 of them, right? And so what we suggest is that vendors really reduce the amount of verticals that they're focusing on initially, look at what their customer base actually looks like, where do they have good relationships, where could they have some repeatability in the use cases that they're delivering.
How many verticals should a particular company try to focus on? And is it dictated by like, if I'm a startup, maybe I should pick 3. If I'm someone like Microsoft, maybe I should pick 5 and work with dedicated partners. How does that actually look in practice?
We would actually say that even for a large company like a Microsoft or an IBM, let's say, it should really be focusing on 2 or 3 verticals. And actually within that, probably 2 or 3 use cases to try to get some repeatability. And then for a startup, often places we see that startups are really focusing on one particular vertical and just a handful of use cases for that particular vertical. There's plenty of money in that, and then they actually can get some repeatability. So we suggest, I guess, in addition to that, that if they pick a particular use case, that they focus not just on the horizontal components that they might sell, servers or connectivity or cloud service, but they also look for how do I actually provide a more end-to-end solution. They don't need to own everything. They can partner, and you can see that vendors are partnering up and down the stack to deliver solutions.
One of the challenges that we haven't talked about yet is this idea of, if I am a big industrial manufacturer, I may do a proof of concept in one area and be like, oh, this is amazing, and like roll it out fully. But then when I start doing things in other areas, I realize that, oh, maybe my 2 solutions won't ever talk to each other, or maybe they're not designed to be as flexible as possible. So how do companies kind of handle that, or how should they be thinking about, I guess, future-proofing their IoT efforts?
We're seeing that customers are actually doing many proof of concepts at the same time. So I think any given company is having 2 or 3 different proof of concepts for different use cases with actually different vendors. So exactly what you're saying, which is I might be working with Microsoft and an application provider to actually look for something like an HVAC system and understanding how that HVAC system is actually performing. But I might have another vendor that I'm using to think about the transport within the building, like elevators. And so, once they finish that proof of concept and start scaling it out, they realize that they don't talk to each other. We think about, what you see as some industrial providers like a Honeywell or a GE or a Siemens that are trying to provide platforms that allow interoperability across different kinds of equipment. And so, I think one of the things that customers should do is really think about the choice of vendors that they have, whether that be a cloud provider like a Microsoft or an Amazon or, an industrial equipment provider. And how can they ensure that the data that they have from different kinds of devices and across their different use cases might be usable or shareable as they think about implementing an initial proof of concept. And probably they need to think about potentially doing proof of concepts with a fewer number of vendors.
Oh, they'll love that. Okay. I'm going to call you Good News Ann from now on. All right. Ann, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Of course.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.